fondly known as Dale Perry, our local almost historian, aren't you?
Yeah.
He's lived here most of his life and knows everything in the world about this town and remembers everything that he knew. In his presentation today, he'll bring to life the historic waterways in our community. I know you will enjoy his talk, so help yourself and sit back and enjoy.
Thank you, folks. I'm glad to be here. 30 years late, but I did make it. Spring of 1929, the Perry family moved into their new home on 1st and Kirby Streets. There were no homes on the south side of 1st Street, so we had an unobstructed view of the York River. We could look to the east and see Captain Bill Marshall's operation. We look to the west and we see the railroad and steamboat dock. All of this was made possible by a little incident in 1916. My dad had a Model T Ford. There weren't many, and to get gas you went down to the wholesaler and they poured a 5-gallon can of gas in. So he goes down to foot of 7th Street. Maynard had the Texaco and Ford agency. Maynard says, "Perry, you want a job?" "Well, I don't have one. I guess I'd consider anything." "Well, I just want you to know both Texaco and Ford think they're too big for one person to represent them in West Point. So I'll give up one and you can have the other. Which one you want, Maynard?" "I'm going to take Ford and go up the street and build a building, and I'm going to sell and service Fords. This is the building that Maynard built." That would have been about 1918, somewhere along in there. My dad took the Texaco and he checked in January the 1st, 1917. If we take a quick look west, we can see the Baltimore boat, everything that is pertaining to it. I want to point out a couple of things. All of this dock at the end of the street, that is a double railroad. They could put cars in there and unload freight and load freight. On the top you can just see a little passageway. The passengers on the boat came in on the boat train. The boat train was one of the first railroads in the United States scheduled at a mile a minute. And they left Richmond Main Street Station and came to West Point in time to catch the schedule for the boat. The West Point Kiwanis Club was active in those days, and our annual trip with the ladies was to take the Baltimore boat to Yorktown. For a while we stopped at Allman's, then Claybank, and then the Gloucester Point, and we would have cars down to meet us there. That was always a big outing. Also, the junior-senior class. We could pay the steamboat company 25 cents a head. They would let everybody in the junior and senior class come aboard. We would take our own drinks in wash tubs, and the school boat would meet us. The boat arrived promptly in the morning at 7:15 and left promptly at 6. There was not much deviation in that schedule. looking up the Mattapony River, if you were approaching West Point by water, Captain Bill's would be first. Then it was the old clubhouse dock, which was there at 5th Street. Then Texaco and the Scantling dock. That dock pretty well covered from 6th Street to 7th Street. The 7th Street was open, and that was a little harbor for smaller boats. On the north side of 7th Street was Captain Smithers' property. He did some seafood packing, and he had 2 tugboats that he kept busy towing vessels and various barges up the river. Next to that was the Benin box plant that burnt. You see the boilers of the old Louise out there in front of it. Benin had everything he had in his box plant. When that burnt, he took a job for the state. His family continued to live on 10th Street, across from the post office. We lived back of the post office and the families were very close through the years. The sketches that you'll see here are all done by Dr. Benin. He was a doctor in Urbana. And most of these were taken from old box photo pictures. On the Texaco 50-foot pier, the rest of it is Scanlon's owned, and they rented it to load schooners and other vessels. Wright Brothers Lumber Company was the big charterer. They were headed up between what was the old furniture factory in Chesapeake on the Pamunkey River. Had a big sawmill up there, and they would load the trucks, bring them down to 7th Street, go up a ramp that was permanent. The dock was 30 feet, so the truck could back the load over as close as he could to the vessel. At that time, the water at that dock was at least 10 feet at low water, 12 feet most of the time. But the stevedores took the lumber off of the lumber trucks and stored it in both the vessel's hold and on deck. I'll show you some pictures of it. You could not ship that lumber by rail for the price that they could get the sailboat. Sailboat vessels often brought back other things. Captain George Carlton was one of the main users of Village in West Point. Some of you may remember him. I think you're living in a house he built. And you could go to Captain George and say, I want a house so-and-so and so-and-so. Okay, where you want it? Well, and he would find a place and build you a house. He built something over 15 houses in town. He was very community-minded and would help anybody with anything. I'll never forget one time, the Davis family was loading watermelon. They made a deal with Captain George to take the watermelons to Baltimore and sell them. So the way you load watermelon is throw it from one person to another. So you can imagine what that was. But as they were throwing the watermelon, Captain George says, you know, I think it would be nice for us to take a moonlight cruise. So the Davis family and Perry's and quite a few of us took a moonlight cruise and ate watermelon. Never forget. Captain Bill Marshall was really one of the big oyster packers of that era, and he was a good old guy, as far as us kids were concerned. We could go down there, and the docks were in bad shape. Everything was in bad shape, but he was still trying to keep going. But he would never say, "Don't go there." He would say, "Be careful where you go." So that stuck with me through the years. Up the upper part of, you'll see some pictures of his shucking operation. It was a big operation, and all the shuckers were on both sides. And you talking about music, they could sing without anything but one voice striking a key, and it was interesting to watch them. So, but anyway, was Captain Bill shipped most of his canned oysters by rail. He did send a lot to New York, probably on vessels like some of you may know Captain Post. Ty contributed this. This is one of Matthews, the W.J. Matthews, that belonged to Captain Bill. She was actually 80 feet long, being 24 feet, through 5 foot 6 inches. And a lot of those folks would load oysters and go to New York. The Benin family had several of them. This was one of them. And just imagine going up the coast of the U.S. with a load of oysters. They had to get them there before they spoiled. So they did the best they could to make time. The record was 7 days from Pork Tank Creek to Staten Island and back. One of the captains was John Inslee. Horace Turner was a stepson of all the Turner family. Captain John was actually raised on a vessel of some kind, and he was an interesting old guy. He was old, and he did go to work for Chesapeake for a little while, but he didn't like that, and he ended up on a schooner somewhere, on a barge somewhere, dying. But he was a good guy. As we look at these vessels, of course, the Waterways was really the steamboat dock. Also, the Chesapeake Corporation was getting going. They were gradually increasing their fleet. In 1932, I think it was, the roads became potholed, and the state said you couldn't run a full load of anything on the roads, which resulted in the mill being short of wood, but they had wood at all of the landings. So they revved up the barges, and Captain Frank Sowers was one of the chief captains, and he would go up to Shanghai or somewhere and get 3 barges and bring them back. And if we saw the 3 barges, we knew the mill had wood. And there wasn't a night that he didn't get his loads and come by about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. He lived actually where the Bank of Essex is now. As we talk about these sailboats, when you think of what the colonists came over in, and you look at something like that and something like that, somebody did some good work designing sailboats. Of course, when they got over here, there's a record. 1713 was the first real experiment with two-mast smaller boats that would carry a cargo. It's debated whether that was in Gloucester, Massachusetts, or Chesapeake Bay. But anyway, the result was by 1780, they had this smaller two-mast schooner, bigger in 1810. 1840, you were getting up to about this size. 1890, they designed what they call a ram. And this is a ram loaded, and you can see from the arrangement of the sails that it's a lot less labor. The balance of the wind forces could be controlled. I failed to mention that when they designed these sailboats, they put centerboard in them. And all of these vessels carry a centerboard that they can pull up or down. The centerboard gives them about 6 to 8 feet more protection from sliding. And also the first sailboats were completely man-powered. Later they developed a deck engine which would lift the anchor and would also, you could go to the drum on each side of the vessel with your hauling line and take snatch blocks, and one man could pull up the sail. So that made it a lot easier for these vessels to make a living. 1920, they came out with a multiple 4 and 6 mast schooners. They were not as successful. They were too late, but they did make an effort at them. This is a picture of Captain George's Lula Phillips under full sail, and I got some after he converted to power. This is a picture of the stevedore storage lumber, which you can see is not a very good job. That's one loaded. They could load them that deep. There's another one with cordwood. They could pile cordwood on them pretty good. There was a pretty good market for cordwood at times. The deck, this shows how they, in the bow, they had the deck engine, and they could pick up their anchor and go. The Lula M. Phillips, to give you an idea of the size and the quality of the hull, that's one place that she was, they replaced a lot of the side because she got rotten. But that does happen too, so everybody gets old, and schooners too. So the design of sailboats became quite a thing. This book does show sketches of the sailboats, and they're very interesting. All of this was done without a computer, so chalk one up for old age. But anyway, me and this thing is. There was a couple more pictures here that I thought might be interesting. As you can see, we've got quite a library. This was a picture of duplication of one of the ships that went to Jamestown. And you can visualize that against what we're looking at. Of course, these vessels were all built and adapted to the use they were going into. Another one was the Bug-Eye on the Chesapeake Bay. 2 masts, it was easy to handle. This is a sketch that Oliver Name did, and you can see how they are sailing with their dredges on each side. Next, use one was a skipjack, and that was successful. It's still, the Reedville Museum has one. I went over and took a trial run on it, and the boy steering the ship says, "All right, we're going to jibe. Grab the boom." Well, 4 or 5 of us grabbed the boom and we went overboard. But anyway, he got his point over real firm. The log canoe, we had one. We're quite sailing craft, and I think it's Oxford, Maryland. They put on a sailboat race every year, and that's the amount of sail that's on a little boat. And it is fun to watch them. They start, the captains have to go ashore, and everybody starts with a whistle. And they run out, and these sailboats are circling in front of them. They swim to the boat. If they miss the boat, they're out of the race. But it's quite a show, and they have those boards. Everybody goes out of them, they're falling. Another lumber logger that was frequent visitor was the Maine, and she was the last one I remember. A guy came ashore at our place and got a barrel of gas and a barrel of kerosene. That was about all they would buy, but it was still plus business. When my dad opened the place up, his whole business was selling the boats. But that fellow said, "I tell you, I don't think I'm going to have the Maine much longer. I pumped the whole Chesapeake Bay through it last night." Another one of my good friends was Captain Ben Riggin. He could sail that vessel into that 7th Street dock, wind up the river, he could turn her and come in alongside and drop a line in my hand. Dale put it on that pilot. Standing orders on that dock were that I could go within 3 feet of the end of the dock, but don't ever go more than 3 feet unless you're grabbing a line from a boat. And that qualified me. And Ben Riggin was one of those graceful people that you love to talk to. He sold the Bohemia to a group out of Gloucester, and unfortunately, they didn't know exactly what to do with it. And she died in Sarah's Creek. Some of you may remember seeing her. But that was a beautiful little schooner. And Captain Benny handled her with one man, and he had epileptic fits. So, the skipjacks could take a lot of punishment, but they were pretty boats. Has some sketches of them. I've got to mention one more thing, and it's something that most of you don't even know. But the Vanim family came down. They bought from Staten Island, New York, Long Island, what they call was Yankee skiff. And it was a unique boat. It's trinker built, but it was so designed that a person could stand, tongue oysters, put them on the culling board. He could get a good load of oysters, and one pair of oars would pull that boat ashore. The Scantlins had 4 or 5 of them, but they were mostly in the Chesapeake Bay area. That's the interior of them. Another thing that I enjoy talking about, because most few of you know I've bored you with it, but the James Adams Floating Theater was the theatrical experience for the Chesapeake Bay area. It was a pretty big boat, and it seated 700 people. And they would go into like Urbana or Gloucester. They came to West Point twice, but wasn't enough parking space for them. The ticket, full ticket, 35 or 40 cents. And the actors lived on the boat. They put on a play, started 8:15, 10:15. The play was over, and they'd give you a concert for an hour. A typical program included, I'm not familiar with this, but Big Shot, Breakfast for One, Tempest and Sunshine, Frisco, Man's Will, Woman's Way, I know that strikes a lot of people, and Shooting Gold. They generated electricity with 2 little tugboats that would move it, and it gave them good control. Every once in a while they'd get in trouble with the church because they were doing it on Wednesday night, and that was prayer meeting. So they would have a parade and do something to keep everybody happy. But the movies killed that. That is about all I have to say. Here's another picture of the log canoe sailing. And if you all want a thrill, just get out of that board. But Jimmy and I got a good place to watch the whole thing, and we enjoyed watching them. That is my presentation. I think I've talked to you for a little over 30 minutes. Us good Episcopalians recognize the fact that no soul is saved after the first 30 minutes.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. Thank you. And I'm I know you all appreciate it. Do you have any questions? Does anyone have any questions? Or do you just,
So what was the bigger industry at the turn of the century, the oyster, Rappahannock oyster, or the lumber, the trees?
could you hear what she said? What was the biggest industry in the turn of the century, the oyster or lumber on the water here?
I would say they were equally divided with the availability. Your oysters weren't available everywhere, but the lumber business was constantly growing. The demand was growing for it, and I would say the lumber business was the larger of the two.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the lumber business is how my dad came from Salisbury, Maryland to King and Queen Courthouse to cut lumber. But,
Any other questions?
I'm just curious, were any of the vessels you mentioned built in the West Point area?
Were any of the vessels that you mentioned built in the West Point area?
not that we know of. There was a German, actually, that had the railway that later became Denmeads and Glass Island. And the Denmeads built barges, but they did not build any sailcraft.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Thank you all for coming, and I wanted to tell you, remember the recipe forms are back on the table. We have refreshments when we adjourn. Our next meeting will be July the 13th at 3. So hope you'll come back again. And please come up and look at his collection of pictures and books, and he brought them so you could look at
Yeah.
them.
Sandra, the recipes we need